So we're talking about contracts this afternoon. I think we've got a really interesting panel here representing venues, agents, tour management and promotions and venues. And we've also all got a bit of varied experience across the way. I'm not going to introduce everybody because I think you'll find they're all on a screen behind. Matt is delayed coming into King's Cross or Euston because somebody's throwing themselves in front of a train. So I'm going to start by asking the panel just to sort of describe their challenges around the area of contracting and paperwork and perhaps throw in some anecdotes as well. I think I'm going to start on the left with you, Barney.
Well, my challenge is partly personal. I fucking hate them. But there's also, I suppose the big challenge for me is the amount of time it takes up. So the amount of time you spend on paperwork of a contract for a rock show is loads more than it is on a comedy show. We run a multi-purpose arts thing, and unlike a lot of people, I scribble all over mine with what we can and cannot do and sign it and send it back. More logical, sensible people don't worry about doing that. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Hilary.
So my background is an agent assistant, and I would send out contracts for various venues, and the most terrible thing was coming back and finding a promoter, going through it with a red pen, going absolutely crazy, yes you, with the red pen, and ruining my beautiful contract that I had spent hours poring over. There's two ways of looking at this. One is the fact that some venues, some promoters, some managers never looked at contracts. The other side of it is when you get a promoter or a venue going crazy with the red pen, we would send it to management for approval. And I think it looks really bad on the agents to the manager, because the manager's going, well, why did you send out a contract that was entirely irrelevant for my artist? I would love to get to the point where there is a standard contract in plain, simple, non-flowery English that just got to the point, if we are selling to a venue of X amount capacity, it's just standard, it's basic. My biggest bugbear is there is a clause on probably all of the contracts that go out about recording and how you can't record at a venue. We all know everyone has a smartphone, everyone records. We need to agree mutually that this happens, not on a scale where they're going to record it and send it to BBC Proms, but a kid is going to do this and we have to just accept it.
Thank you. Emma, probably some of the contracts that you're looking at are slightly more lengthy tomes.
They are lengthy tomes. The contract at the O2 is about 52 pages. And I've been there 8 years, and I often have to check because I can't actually remember what's in there. But I also think that most promoters, understandably, don't read it because the main points of the deal are done before the contracts are issued, so they know when they can get in and get out. They know what the rent is. Anything a little bit weird, we've already agreed it between us. So I don't think they read it. I don't think that's a problem. The main point at which for us, and I'm sure it's the same for most people, is that the contract kicks in when something goes wrong. So when we've had to look at the contract and it's actually been helpful, whether or not it's been signed or read, is if there's a little bit of a quirk, like if somebody's equipment has been locked into a venue the night before and the show gets cancelled, who has to cover the costs and who has to pay? Or if we had to look through our contract, we had a show at Wembley and weirdly the same artist, it happened to them, I think, when they played the O2, they got snowed into a venue the night before, so they couldn't make it down. So who's due to pay the cost? Like, are they liable for the hire fee? Are they liable for like our staff costs that we can't cancel because it's too late? So I think that's the point at which the contract is quite helpful because it makes it clear who is responsible for what. Having said that, and I don't want to go on and on, what usually happens is it's a starting point. So if a show gets cancelled, which it's happened to us 16 times this year, not that I'm counting, but a show's gone on sale and it's cancelled sometimes on the day, you know, like we've all got a relationship with the people who are booking our venue. So are you going to be completely draconian about the contract, or are you going to give them a bit of flex because they've given you 30 shows that year? So it's often just a starting point anyway.
Trey, just from an artist's point of view, are you personally involved in designing and writing the riders for your artists? I know, obviously, we've worked a lot on Frank, he doesn't strike me as a kind of Mariah Carey, paint the dressing room lilac kind of guy. But how involved do you get in that side of it? And then when you're about to go on tour, you know, do you have a satchel full of contracts that you've read every detail of, or have you had a conversation with each of the spaces that you're going into?
Have I just shown myself up by saying that I don't read through the contracts? I think sort of us having a conversation a little bit just downstairs has made me realise it's not only me that hates contracts. We all hate contracts, and I think that just sort of proves how outdated they are and how we know that it's just going to be a lot of red tape or a lot of like issues that just need to be like talked over, argued over again and again and again. I get the slightly easier side of it, which is essentially that I'm going to send my tech rider, my hospitality rider, through to the agent, and any requests that I need, like we need a barricade at each venue, which isn't that straightforward sometimes. And I just send that to the agent, and then it's their job to do all the extra, like shouting at people stuff. But you know, this is where, like you say, there is a standard contract at the minute, and lots of it isn't relevant to smaller venues. Lots of it isn't, you know, is extra relevant for larger venues, and you know, it's about the agent and the venue and the promoters just talking it out, making it relevant to them, because I'm not, you know, I could do a million riders that are relevant to different size venues, but I'm doing other stuff, do you know? And you know, and whatever I do is probably, you know, that's just more information that might get sent to the wrong person, and you know, stuff like that. It's just like I get the easy part. I'm very aware of that. So, but whatever.
Is there something that, I mean, the thing that I find, and I would imagine a lot of people here looking after venues that are on the small side, because we're grassroots. So we're just a 200 capacity venue. I'm really, really lucky, and I've got a team of people, because we used to be owned by Hampshire County Council. We're part of a bigger trust. So I have people who are very skilled at paperwork to help me. But I've got friends who run venues, and it's just them. They're doing the sound and taking the tickets. And there's got to be some sort of a move to just not ask for things you know you're not going to get. So if you know a small venue isn't going to give you 2 bottles of Smirnoff and a bottle of Jack Daniels, then don't stick it on a rider. We're creating complications for every single one of our jobs. Not necessarily at your scale, I don't think, Emma, because that's huge, you know. But we were saying before, everyone fixes these problems with a phone call. Yeah. You know, when I write all over a contract, that's because I'm a part of a big organisation. I have to do that.
But what you said about the rider and not asking for 2 bottles of whatever, how many of the artists realise that that's a show cost? You know, the fancy, someone put hummus somewhere, I know it's someone's big bugbear. You know, all your fancy things that you want in your rider, it's the artist's cost. Do they know that? Are they aware of it?
That's where I feel like it's definitely a manager's job, and to some extent a tour manager's job to manage a band's expectations massively. And that's, you know, that is going, okay, this is going to be, maybe you do a big tour and you're doing a warm-up show somewhere, it's a much smaller venue. That is saying, it's a smaller venue, guys, understand that you're going to get this, you're going to get that, but you're not going to have any of this, or it's a seated show, you're not used to it, or, you know, whatever. But in terms of the contract, that I think, if there was a case where we could have different templates of contracts just for different size shows, then all that takes is the agents or the promoters, whoever drafts those, saying to a tour manager, this is like, if you were doing a 200 cap show, what would you need to see? And we'll go, okay, well we'll cut down all this and we'll cut down all this rider. Or if you're doing a 4,000 cap show, what do you need? And then it becomes a lot more, you know, then we need to have 15, 20 crews, so we'll need to have more riders. That's simple. We can do a 200 cap show with probably like 4 people.
I think what Emma said earlier about cancellation of shows, one of the main objectives, I think one of the main parts of a contract is to cover the venue and the promoter and the artist for cancellation. If an artist gets out of bed one day and decides, can't be arsed doing that show, it's their responsibility to cover the show costs. You know, if the venue, you know, if there's a problem at the venue, if there's flooding at a venue, I think, or if, you know, everyone's been affected by weather, you know, snow has cancelled so many shows, festivals across Europe, there has to come a level of common sense attached to everything. If there's cancellation insurance, I think is one thing that we have to talk about, because you get show costs and it would say insurance. You need to specify what's public liability insurance and what's cancellation insurance. I realise on some of the smaller venues it's not always practical, but I want to know if an artist goes into a show and a kid is at their show and breaks their leg, who's responsible for that? Also, what we were talking about earlier, if an artist is at a venue and I had a case where the tour manager's laptop was stolen, who covers that? Does the artist have to use their tour insurance, or should we be looking at venues to have this insurance? It's a minefield.
I sort of think that the insurance clauses are probably, they're probably fairly standard across the board, but actually I don't know the case of any venue or promoter that will know the detail of somebody else's insurance thing. And, generally it will be the one thing that isn't in the small print that you'll end up with anyway. I was probably naively surprised to find out recently that a lot of promoters will put an insurance line into a costing, but they're not taking the insurance out. And they're saving that up as a kind of pot that if there is an issue at the end of the year, that's how they use it. And it tends to be if they're sort of 3,000 capacity or below, they won't actually take out the insurance on a show. We have a couple of other things that I think are sort of grey areas that specifically apply, or probably to a lot of us, which are around costs for merchandise or costs for filming, which don't tend to necessarily go on the settlement because they might be a different company that comes with the artist that's dealing with it, and the promoters tend to, sometimes they want to be very involved in that conversation and sometimes they don't. So that's the thing. I wonder if we can talk about communication though, because it seemed to me, I had a little secret squirrel who sent me a bunch of contracts for me to have a look at before we did this panel, and I have to say I was a little bit wide-eyed and shocked at A, some of the fees that were being paid to artists in 200 capacity venues. B, probably shouldn't be surprised, but some of the rider requests. I know there's a panel later today about mental health and alcohol and all of that, but really some quite shocking stuff in there. Bit of a nostalgia warning. Back in the day when I worked as an agent's assistant, I used to pick up the phone to people, and I used to pick up the phone to Mark David in Tunbridge Wells and have a 15-minute phone call. 5 minutes of that would probably be social. How's the girlfriend? Oh, you've got that new girlfriend, Bev? Yeah. How's it going? Yeah. And then 10 minutes, it would be literally going through the detail in front of a diary. And by the end of that phone call, I would be faxing him a contract. So that sort of dates it for you. We talked a little bit about this backstage. Do you think there's enough communication which isn't just by email?
It's difficult, isn't it? I guess I come from an age where there is a reasonable amount of communication, so I know the people that I'm booking shows with, I know the agents, I'm pretty good at talking to tour managers. I've managed a band, so I understand how it is from the other side. I've tour managed a band, so I understand how it is from the other side. It's fine. There is a thing cropping up more and more around the younger people feeling scared to phone or just not being familiar with phoning people. So you're then down to writing backwards and forwards that comes out confrontational almost without fail. You don't mean to be. It's just how it seems. So for me personally, no, I think communication is pretty good. I think it is something that affects our industry, but one of the reasons it affects our industry is because the contracts are wrong. So they are asking for things, like you're saying about recording rights and photography, it says that under no circumstances. I got one the other day that said, except mobile phones, obviously, or something. And you go, well, of course, that's fine. Because at the moment, I'm signing a legal document saying I'm not going to let a kid take a photo, and yet every gig I go to, there it is,
But it's so hard, because you literally, like both just said, like you kind of want all the detail, but you also want all of the common sense. And this is a thing, because you're always going to get people they'll take it to the letter, and then you get people like, obviously I get the contract by the time it's all written and done, and if I have people going, oh well, he did say this, and we'll be like, well, of course we're finding people recording, and it's just like, once they can talk to a person, and the communication comes out, and it is just, you can actually have a conversation with someone being like, oh, but is this okay and is that okay? It's actually technically too late because the contract's already been signed, but of course we're going to use.
But a lot of the stuff there around. So like the security, I'm assuming it's the same, everyone's going, oh right, I get that too. But it says there must be security on the dressing room, across the front of the stage, at every exit into the venue, at the sound desk. Well, it's like a 100 capacity venue in Preston. Where do we think we're putting people? When we're grassroots, we're asking for something as though we're doing 1,000 capacity, 1,500 capacity. I got one from a band that obviously have been bigger and are a bit smaller now. And they were sweethearts, but their rider was just ridiculous. And you just think, well, obviously, look at what, like you're saying, I know it's easier to do one, but just...
But if you get a contract that's, we'll say, for 1,500 or 2,000 cap venues down, then it takes all the bullshit out of so much stuff. When it comes to security, I think an awful lot of that comes down to the genre of artist that you're working for. If you work in a folk venue, it's very different to working with heavy metal bands. It's very different to working with hip-hop artists.
But we do both.
You have a mosh pit, and I'm toast. I will not survive, so I want to know that security will find 5'1" of me and drag me out.
We do folk, which doesn't need security,
Yeah.
and we do Black Peaks.
It's also
metal
got to
shows.
cover like a contract which is for a standard contract, which is say for approximately 1,000 to 2,000 cap venue, which then, like you say, also has to apply to like much bigger venues, much smaller venues. You're also looking at the complete other opposite side of the spectrum of promoter, where I've done a show for like 1,500 people, where it's a completely inexperienced promoter who just fucked off when it came to like doors and stuff, and like wasn't opening doors, wasn't there for guest list, wasn't there to do a security brief when I said be here for a security brief. So when you, especially when you're in a council-run venue, which is sometimes more of the genre of older people that are just volunteering to be ushers rather than security, like, you know, we have to also prepare ourselves and cover our own backs for that.
I guess so, but it's. I know Jane said don't necessarily go into your vague old memories. But in my vague old memories, the agents used to choose the promoters and the venues that they wanted to work with because they were good.
Yes.
And it was harder to get into it, for sure, but there was no one who was rubbish on the circuit because they lasted one show, they messed it up and they were gone. You know, and that's...
But people have to come in and learn as well. You know,
not on their own, though. They can learn with experienced people.
But I think, you know, one side of it is when I use trained assistants to understand contracts. People don't inherently know what a force majeure is. People have to be trained, people have to be taught, people have to be willing to learn. Yeah. And there has to be the elder lemons that teach these people. You can't just assume that someone, like I had to write out the A to Z of who does what. This is what AdMat, this is what a promoter does, this is what an accountant does. And the other part of the contract side that we didn't talk about is the contract also details when the deposit is due and when the balance is due. There is nothing more frustrating than sitting and saying, okay, my deposit's due today, the day has been and gone, no money in, and then all of a sudden the promoter says, oh, I need an invoice. You knew that 6 months ago when I signed when we sent you the contract. All the back and forth. Tell people what you need, because what happens is the tour manager says to me a month prior to show day, what money have we in? I need a deposit release to pay for a tour bus, or I need a deposit release to do whatever. And I'm like, well, I've got 50 pence in because no one has sent me any money. Like, that's the other side of the contract. It's there to protect the artist, it's there to protect the agent, because someone's going to say, well, where is there? There's no money for this. That's so important.
Yeah, and in terms of
No. It's not an industry standard. Well, it's not. I'm only a year away from being an assistant, but you know what happens as well is there's different contracting parties. You might be a venue. Well, you have to tell people this. I will always, but as an assistant, you go back and you say, what paperwork do I need to be paid?
But also people don't read it, so we're not allowed to do deposits, and it's on our offer sheet. It's right there on the first offer sheet. And I spend a good amount of my time replying to assistants who haven't seen it, agents who haven't seen it, finance departments who haven't seen it. It's not what we do. We're not permitted to do that. The same as we're not permitted to buy toilet rolls until they've turned up. Until we've seen the thing, we can't do it.
But as an agent, you need management approval. So, for example, if you don't send deposits, if you do 100% on show day or whatever the case might be, it's up to management to approve that. It's not down to the agent to say, yeah, grand, we'll take your cash on show day.
But it never was the case. that we needed deposits for smaller shows. Nobody needed deposits for smaller shows.
On that side of things, just from my point of view, that's like exactly like you said. There's a lot of costs that we have to incur, organising a tour that have to happen beforehand. And so if you can release, like even that's a whole load of like red tape anyway. Yeah. But that we have to sign if we're going to take some deposits early. That like, this. Like I say, money doesn't grow on trees, and it comes from some. There's some bands that probably can't afford to. I've had a band before coming from America that were just starting out, who we literally were not able to get a van because they'd never been to the UK before, so they had no money in the UK, and they just started like 2 months before, and then just blown up at South by Southwest. So they'd done, they were just doing their first ever tour, and they had no money to get a van, and luckily I had a really good relationship with Matt Snowballs, who was just like, okay, look, we're going to let you take the van and pay after the first show, when I could be like, well, I'll just bank some money and I'll do it. And but like you said about communication, especially like I'm one for doing stuff on email, and I would admit that because I really don't like phone calls. But let's be honest, you can get a lot more done with one phone call than you can with like 20 emails, and and we should all be doing that for sure.
Emma, I just wanted to ask you, as a sort of receiving house venue, what's the most frequent contractual conversation that you have to have?
Well, off the top of my head, one that comes up quite often, which is where the contract is actually quite helpful, is our overrun fee, which is actually, it is very, very high. Should an artist overrun, it's a really high figure, but it's actually helpful to have it in the contract because at the arena level, there are some artists who you need them to get on stage, and the reason why you need them to get on stage is because at the end of the gig, if they overrun by 45 minutes, we're in Greenwich, nobody can get home. So we've potentially got 16,000 people with no tube running if it's not a weekend. So we need them to get on stage. Also, also just from a personal point of view, if it's the kind of artist that brings with them like a parents and kids audience, you want them to go on stage because they can't keep those kids awake till 9:45 until an artist decides that they will go on stage. So the overrun fee is a penalty that we find helpful to talk to the artist about through the promoter, to say you need to go on stage because if you overrun, you will incur this huge fee, and it often helps us to get the artist on stage when they wouldn't normally. The only thing I would say though is if it's an artist we had one last year, I'm trying to talk about it without mentioning who it is, but they played a lot of gigs and they're very, very rich, so they don't care. Like our overrun fee is very high. It's pittance to them, so they go on when they go on.
But you don't want the money, you want them to go on.
No, we don't want the money. We're just trying to find any way we can to get them on so that you can then get people home at the end of the night.
Usually incurring a fee for something does make most artists kind of pay some attention to it, I find. I'd like to throw it out a little bit to the audience to see if we've got any questions from anybody specifically. As we have microphones, we'll know that.
It's not a question per se, I just wanted to vaguely back something that Barney was saying, which would be nice when, for example, I'm communicating with an agent or an agent's assistant, that for 1 minute it felt like that person had bothered to just Google what our venue was, rather than go through this rigmarole of going, how are you 150 capacity? Does that include crew? Does that? It's all on our website. What we do is on our website, quite a lot of our equipment lists are all there. I always say, there's a PDF if you need to know what kind of desk we've got. And that's probably saved me 3 hours a week in one agent alone, if that's done. It would just be nice to think, I'm creating a show where the band and the agent, etc., are going to go where probably 80% of the ticket revenue on this day. I will barely cover my show costs, but I'll have a nice day. Maybe you could Google who we are first.
That was one thing, actually, that was what we were talking about recently, was for agencies to have smaller venue caps for that same reason. So they're not going to ask you 25 to ask questions, wind you up. And for venues to send that to agencies is invaluable because there's constantly a question, so
again, we do send it, it doesn't get
but
read.
It doesn't get to the right people, and I think that's what, like certainly at X-Ray, we're trying to build that and hone that because we have to, because it has to, I used to think that it had to come from the top down, but it doesn't, it has to come from the bottom up, from the bottom up. But, sending that to the relevant agents and, being the venue that goes back and says, well, actually, I sent it to you, go have a look, that might shake them into it as well, because they don't want to be looked as if they're wrong.
I mean, I can appreciate it with like smaller promoters, certainly, but like for our situation, we have a 150 cap room and a 50 cap room. We put on just over 211 shows last year. I have 2 people on the team, one of which is me. I'm also the bar manager, you know, the cleaner, the everything else. Like, I don't have time to sit there for 3 hours a day going, I've sent you the PDF 19 times now. Please click the paperclip for fuck's sake.
Do send it. Send that email.
Do you know what else? That has just spiked a nasty shudder in me. That thing where we have to get approval for everything now. So the artwork needs approval. The support bands need approval. So you have to go and find out if you've got a support. Ask them, then ask the thing, then they've got a different thing going on. It's added a lot of backwards and forwards, and the pressure is always on the promoter. So you get something like, I got an email saying the on sale is tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, at 5 o'clock at night. What? And it doesn't go the other way. It just comes at you as a little venue. Everything is directed at you. It's not the same as you get bigger through the industry, but everything, it feels like all of the pressure of the industry is resting on these tiny little broken rooms around the country. And everyone says, oh, we really want to help them, we want to support them, that's great. Just fill in this 15-page document and then check through that. And then go out to these support acts, check they're okay, then come back to us and we'll see if they're good enough. And then show me your artwork and see if that works. But it doesn't need to. For little venues, it doesn't need to.
Do you want the artists to kick off because they don't like some mate's band at a venue? They will.
Let them kick off. Say to them, it's 200 capacity, we're trying to save venues, they'll all be gone if you keep up with your prima donna nonsense.
Can I just say,
not all of them are.
And I don't want to blame agents at all. Like, I think it's as hard for agents as assistants and managers and other people. I think the whole industry just doesn't recognise the pressure on these little venues. It is killing us.
But the agents are getting the pressures from
management
and
the band
and
as
also
well.
from the management. That's the thing, and it's not necessarily
absolutely, and labels and everyone is pressured. Like I say, I used to manage a band called Reuben, and we toured loads of little venues, and we got to a point, and it was a big enough point for me to start to see the pressures that were on me as well. I used to get crazy about ticket figures not getting sent out, whereas before I never understood why anyone would want ticket figures. It just seemed another pointless bit of admin. So we get it to some degree.
Managers, Mondays and Fridays ticket counts for the UK. If you haven't sent that by 6 o'clock, dear Hills, where's my ticket count? And you might have only sold 2 tickets, but they still want to know.
Yeah, and I was the same. I was as a manager, I totally got that. And I wouldn't say that anybody's job is easy in this. I think everyone's dealing with pressure, but this circuit will disappear because everyone is adding another layer of, oh, it'd be useful if we had that, or it'd be useful if we had that, or it'd be useful if that. When there's one person working at a venue trying to be professional.
Can I, just to your point, I do think grassroots venues have it a lot harder, but it doesn't, the situation doesn't really change at arena level. We'll get told, just like you, 5 o'clock the night before, we're announcing this massive show tomorrow. And you just think, oh, could you have mentioned that earlier? It's 5 o'clock, people have left. Like, have we got a signed manifest? Are we ready? Have we got the assets for the website? I don't think it gets any easier, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why we find out so late. I would guess it's because everybody in the industry is under so much pressure. They're working as fast as they can, but it's just people don't have the slack. I don't think that people in the industry have enough time to do the job as well as they could, whether that's agents or promoters. Like, as a venue, we can't run our venue as well as we like because everything's last minute. And this we've got an 8-show tour going on sale tomorrow. Tomorrow is 5 o'clock. Have you signed off the manifest? We've got, like, people have gone home. So how are we running this industry where people don't have time to do the job as well as they could, whether that's a promoter or an agent or a manager? Nobody's doing it as well as they could because either we're understaffed or I don't know what it is, but it's just not working as well as it could.
This is the issue as well with emails over phone calls. If you're going to make a phone call to someone, you know you're going to do it in business hours, or, you know, if you're talking to maybe tour managers, it can be slightly outside business hours, or just later in the day, please. But you know, if you're doing emails, everyone has to be available 24/7. And, you know, and people are expected to answer outside of office, you know, office hours. And, you know, people are expected to, it's 5, because they'll have hours to do that. It's like people have gone home. So if we maybe we should be all moving back a step. Who'd have thought it? Jesus Christ. But yeah, back a step and like away from technology slightly and just more. Like this is a super social industry. That's the whole point of it. So that's half the reason we're all in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and if if we can't just talk to people, we're just all fucking robots on laptops. Then like, what's the point?
I think we've got a question in the corner there, and then we will head towards starting to talk about some solutions together.
Hello. This is an interesting one because it's to do with contracts. What's the correct approach when you've agreed your costings and then the agent decides to throw a load more on that weren't there to start with, that are nearly costing you an extra £1,000, but because you've agreed, sure, in theory, that should be where it sticks, but the result is, if you don't agree to those costs, the show gets pulled.
My advice on that would be to always agree to those costings subject to any change in the first instance. And if they do put another £1,000 on it, then obviously that's got to come off the fee. But it's about making that a sort of, that would be my thing, make it a provisional thing. Nothing's ever signed off, things are always going to change. The artist is suddenly going to decide they have to have the mini Stonehenge on stage with them or whatever it is. And cost, that should always be a fluid thing. We do it with all of our settlements. We rarely sign off a settlement on the night until it's been checked by a bunch of other people.
I understand you saying that in words, but the thing is, if I don't pay this extra, the show is not going to happen.
Well, I think it's.
I'd say don't do it.
It's been what would you do, Barney?
I wouldn't do it. Yeah. I've had it.
Little
things.
It's called being blackmailed.
If it's a £50 extra, then I'll swallow it and I'll think, oh well, there you go. Put that down to experience. Next time I'll make the offer a little bit bigger for that bit. But if it's a big one, I mean, by the sound of that sounds malicious on the part of the agent. What size room is it?
500.
Yeah.
£1,000. Okay.
But what costs were they? What were the extra costs that we're putting in?
Accommodation and backline.
Okay, so I mean, I'm assuming that something like that is going to come probably from the tour manager on the day who's obviously not read the contract and just has suddenly decided that, oh, hang on, I thought this was going to happen, and either that's something that's come from the agent or the tour in general, and that's been maybe the like with the other venues, that's how it's been. So they've just assumed. I've been guilty of that. And so they've gone, oh, hang on, this, and so obviously we've just called the agent, gone, actually this needs to get sorted, and they've called you and gone, hey, extra costs. But like, that's anything. If I went to a promoter on a day and was like, this isn't sorted, sort it, and knew that was going to cost them, then I'd be an idiot if I was going to expect that just to be like, yes, here's magic money. Like if it's a no, if it has to be a no purely based on like profit and loss, then that's kind of, anything you do where you haven't checked your own work, as in the tour manager hasn't checked their own work and so has to make change at the last minute, then it's fair game if you say no. You don't always have to say yes.
I think that's true. So much of what what the agent will go and say to you, they haven't just decided they'll wake up on a Monday and on a whim try and piss someone off, although sometimes they do. But they don't do it intentionally. It's a tour manager that comes and asks. It's a manager that comes and asks. It's a record label that says, oh, you know what, we need to announce and go on sale with this tomorrow. The intention isn't there. We all work together on a daily basis. You know yourself, if there's one person that you dread working with, you go, oh God, I have to work with them again. You don't intentionally go out to do that. And I think while, yes, the grassroots venues do have a harder deal on some things, agents who want to work with them, who have smaller bands, and whether their band's on the way up or on the way down, no one wants to actively go out and just fuck you over. Yeah. They really, really don't. And that comes as an agent's assistant, as a head of operations at X-Ray Touring. I don't think, like you said about sending the venue specs over, yes, agencies forget them, and yes, they will ask you 25 questions. But if you go back nicely and say, listen, lads, I've sent this to you 19 times this week, someone open an inbox somewhere along the way, I guarantee, 9 times out of 10, it will be met with going, yeah, sorry, I've been numpty, I haven't opened my inbox. It's down to communication, it's picking up the phone, and, it's not just the youth of today that hide behind an email.
Thank you for that. What are the solutions, Barney? What would you do if you were in charge? You're suddenly Prime Minister tomorrow.
It's very hard, isn't it? I I mean, the first thing that I would do is try and weed out some of the daft stuff. So we do comedy and we do folk. And they are really simple agreements. Only rock and roll insists on these really complicated agreements. So I think there needs to be a consensus within the industry, with all of us, to make all of our lives easier, that we get something simple up to various levels. So up to 500, up to 1,000, up to 1,500, whatever it is. I think there needs to be some sort of work around the rider side of it, that it's unhealthy for bands, it's difficult for venues. You get some requests where you've got to go out and find... I had one where I had to go out and find a particular brand of sushi, and you just think, oh, come on. You know, really? Oh, and a particular coffee from a coffee shop that wasn't open in my town. Just don't.
Just have Nescafe.
Exactly, and like it. I think there is... I mean, this whole thing around communication, you know, nothing that anyone has said doesn't ring true. I feel like I've got it easier than a lot of grassroots venues, and I'm exasperated with it. So there must be people here who are, well, I don't know, my heart goes out to you. I think if to make it easy is just work with good people. Not everything needs approval. Work with a promoter who can choose some bands and educate bands to understand that if they want to book a band themselves and bring it with them, that's one thing. But if they want to say to the local promoter, it's up to you, but I want to check what they're like, because you don't want to be dealing with loads of approvals. Imagine that, a tour, 30-date tour, every venue submitting 2 people. That's a lot of work for all of us, for no point, because the guy who's in the town knows who to book. That's why he's a promoter.
I think the problem, with that is the bands don't want to rock up on stage that night and not know, or get into the venue and not at least have had some sort of information about who's going to be playing there.
I mean, they can be told. You could say, tell us who you've booked, and Facebook details for them. That's all right. That's fine. But it's just that approval. It's like approving your likenesses. There's clauses in there that say, you're not allowed to associate the band at any point now or in the future. What, so you're never allowed to say that band played here? It's the stupid clauses that whoever first invented it, every other agency went, oh, brilliant, I'm having that, and added that in. It doesn't need to. If I can book Russell Howard with a 2-side bit of paper, I'm pretty sure a £50 band can do the same.
Isn't the challenge of introducing that simple contract that if you asked an agent to produce it, if you asked a promoter to produce it, and if you asked a venue to produce it, you get 3 very different documents? So I guess
yes,
my
but
question
I think if you put us 5 in a room, I reckon we come up with quite a good one.
With enough wine and enough time,
exactly.
We come up with something in the middle.
Yeah.
Solutions?
Hello, sorry, we have a little accident over here. I think it's definitely about managing about managing bands' expectations. I think maybe we need to also think about the fact that maybe it was the case that back in the day, bands would just be playing the size venue that they can play. So maybe just bands did, like, once you hit your 1,000 cap, you'd only do 1,000 cap. And once, if you're a 200 cap band, that's what you do. But I think now there's really like bands are playing like really big venues, and then maybe they'll have 2 really small venues on a tour. And so maybe it is the time to bring in a new template and maybe a few templates to apply for smaller venues, medium-sized venues, bigger venues, and then that way it can just be tailored a little bit more to keep everybody happy, because the range is so wide that you can't keep everyone happy.
I think it's a really good idea if we could get tailored-made templates, not necessarily one for 500 cap, one for 1,000 caps, one for 3,000 caps, because we'd be there all day. But I think if we had one for even for venues under 2,000 cap, that there's a standard one. One thing with the artwork, and approving artwork, because some bands like to change their logo every other album cycle, it is important that the artist does get approval on the artwork. I know it's a pain in the ass and we ask you to change it by a millimetre or make it 2 millimetres smaller, or, put it in shading. But it is the art, it's not the agent out to wind you up, I promise.
What I got, this is my most frustrating one to date, was I was sold a band because 3 members of that band were in bigger bands. then I was not allowed to mention that anywhere on the artwork. So I was paying a much higher fee, and I know I'm not alone, I spoke to other promoters on that tour. I was paying a much higher fee for basically an unknown band that you couldn't explain to anyone wasn't an unknown band. It was ridiculous. And then it was a £10 a ticket, no one knew it was someone famous, so, 40 people there. Well, that's not good for the artist. It can't have come from the agent. Who thought that was a clever idea? Someone should have told them no.
Managers.
Before it gets to me.
Management.
Right, so someone needed to say to the manager, actually, we've sold it on the basis of this. You get more people there if we mention it, let's mention it.
But that's why ticket counts are so important, because then you can see, we've sold 2 tickets this week, we've sold 0,
They knew.
We've sold 20
they were told
tickets.
the whole way through, and they did not care.
But then these are bands and managers, and acts, that won't be doing it again. And that's how you weed people out. The people that are willing to work with everybody, with the agent, with the venues, with the promoters, and they will, if they play the game, then we will all help them become bigger. And that's we say blame the manager. That's not really fair, because the manager's only going from what the band's saying more than likely. They're like, well, we don't want to be promoted on the back of the band I did 20 years ago, so no, don't mention it. And that's There's always someone to blame though.
I would also argue it should be in the list of details before you actually say you want to pay that huge fee as well.
Well, since they'd written in big letters all over the email, I didn't think it would be particularly a problem,
But it's always the things that we don't preempt as well, isn't it? That tend to be the big problems. I'm not sure how we're doing for time here. Does anybody have any other questions? There's one at the front here.
Thank you. I'm Rob from Fuel Rock Club in Cardiff. Emma made a great point about the late announcing of tours and the people have gone home in the office. The key with grassroots music venues is we don't go home. The entire staff of my venue is sat here, the 2 of us here. So we've closed today and yesterday. So it does happen 24/7. There's not a time, like most self-employed people, when you don't think about your venue. So you constantly are doing stuff. I think this is, going back to the riders thing, a lot of issues I've had are riders that the artist has never even seen. Yeah. And that bands that will turn up, and you've got this massive rider with alcohol, I know we're covering this later, and those bands are teetotal, or they have dietary requests, etc., and the rider comes through and you've gone out and bought it, and it's completely irrelevant. And a lot of us, I think, are moving towards just doing what we think is reasonable. And it is a basic thing. But you can spend a lot of money on riders, can't you?
Yeah, huge. Yeah. I mean, I used to, when I was a self-employed promoter, I spent more on one rider than I did on my entire family shop. And this band, I can probably talk about them because they're not going anymore. It was a band called Jacasta, who I was mates with. And he came out of the dressing room and went, "We got 2 bottles of wine, do you want one?" Could have choked him. Then there was lemons on the rider. And he was like, "Oh, no, the last tour manager had a thing about lemons." Right, so none of this is needed. Yeah. And you shouldn't have to learn the business through other people making ridiculous demands, you complying with them, and it not making any sense.
So if that was the case, would you not, you get this ridiculous rider in, it's going to cost you 150 quid, your budget's only 75, would you not have picked up the phone to the tour manager, because you should have been communicating with them about loading and stuff like that, and say, "Listen, you're having a laugh here, can we rein this in?"
To be honest, on that one, because I knew them, I thought if that's what they've asked for, that's what I'll give them, and I gave them the whole thing. Because I wanted to trust that we had a relationship. I don't mind a big rider if it's wanted, if it's genuine. there are some people who can only sing if they've got a particular sort of tea. There are some people who really like donuts, whatever it is, I don't mind. What I find a challenge, and I think we're all in this, I'm in this, we're all in this. When I was doing Reuben, we ended up having to increase the rider to be taken seriously. Because if we didn't have a big rider, some Burke in a little venue wouldn't go, "Oh, that's nice, that's very reasonable." They'd cut that in half. So we had to ask for double, so we got treated properly. And I think it's an industry-wide issue that we're making stuff up and sticking it as a contract. Yeah. We're making up nonsense that we don't even want because we feel like somehow that makes us a better thing.
So there's a standard in America which is definitely something that should be implemented here more over here, which is that the tour manager will resend the rider updated, relevant to what they need. Bearing in mind, I'm talking probably more tour bus touring, because obviously you're bringing stuff with you, put it on a tour bus, living on a tour bus, and you send the updated rider 2 days before. And every venue does that, every promoter does that. If the tour manager doesn't send it, you'll get an email being like, you need to send an updated rider. And so I hate waste, and I really don't think I'm the only person. And I couldn't just leave like a whole box of beer in a room afterwards. I'd be like, well, we're taking it with us and we're not having a box of beer tomorrow. Like, what? That is money. At the end of the day, if you're talking versus deals as well, that's our money that we're wasting. That's 8% of our fucking money that we're wasting if we just, well, whatever, we don't need those 2 bottles of champagne, fuck it. Just leave them behind. It's horrible. And so you just need to, that I always forget when I come back and do touring over here in Europe that we don't do that, and maybe that should be a new industry standard.
Maybe it's a new industry standard that all of the venues in this room tell the agents what they're providing as a rider, and you have a standard thing. And yes, artists will have specific throat teas or whatever, but you could actually just say, here's what we provide. And if you all did it, they can't argue with it.
I've had a lot of trouble explaining to the other people within my organisation why we're providing alcohol for performers at all. Because when I was part of Hampshire County Council, that's a workman. We're employing a workman to do a task. No one else is getting drunk. The builder's not getting drunk. The bloke doing the tarmac isn't. The box office provider, he doesn't get drunk. No one else is getting drunk. He's the only one getting drunk. And because I come from a background of getting drunk, I suppose, it seems normal to me, and I've had to explain it. But comedians don't get anything. They get a pint of beer. That's it. 1. Folk artists, 1. Everybody else, 1. Rock and roll, 48 cans of lager, 3 bottles of spirits and 2 bottles of wine. And it's because, again, a lot of the time when you're touring at that level, that's the only benefit you see. You're not making any money as a band. You don't get anything else. So the thing you get is alcoholism. And until that turns into a terrible thing, it's a lot of fun.
I think we are now living in an age where that is being treated as a real and current issue. I know Frank always talks very intelligently about it, in that when he goes to his office, there's a slab of lager there, and when he drinks that, somebody brings him more, but he can't get a hot meal. And I think that's going to be covered in the panel that follows us from now.
There's 2 things, basically. One, ask questions. Asking questions is completely fine. If you're a promoter and you think the rider's enormous and unnecessary, then just say to the tour manager, like, oh, this is quite big, we haven't got a budget for this, could you cut anything off? Is all this still relevant? Because a lot of the time, I mean, like, not... Yeah, well, this is it. Not with my current agent, which is fantastic, but I've had agents before where it doesn't matter how many times you go, this is the current rider, please send it out. They've got like loads saved, and they're sending stuff from 3 years ago, and so you're like, that's not even, or we don't even drink any of that anymore. So ask questions, that's fine, and then also anything that needs to be flag it up in advance. If you're going to cut down our rider by half because you think it's out of date, just say that in advance, and then we can come to a compromise, and we can say, okay, fine, we just need the tea. The tea's the only important thing. And yeah, and it's just communication, like we've said.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel and all of you for listening.